Real Men of Real Estate with Steve Matley, construction manager and real estate developer, business owner, and educator.
Did you know that right now there's 22,000 units deficit?
Tunde Ogunwale, real estate development professional, Naval Academy grad, and veteran with a deep understanding of the public sector process.
All of us want to live in thriving communities.
Brian Fox, real estate expert and investor, dedicated to helping hundreds of clients make money in real estate every year.
There's so much housing going in.
The builders are begging for more land.
Future company can come in, lease up space to employ those people who are living in the homes.
We have to put the housing in place.
We either have to have houses,
They want to make sure that there's a strong employment.
logistics centers, things like information hubs. We are a shipping economy now. There's economies all over the country where their prices are doubling and tripling. Welcome everybody to another edition of Real Men of Real Estate, coronavirus edition. We're all still helping ourselves to a hefty amount of quarantine. And today we have actually a very special episode. We're going to talk to a really good friend of mine and colleague, and actually my partner in philanthropy and the president of ShelterBox USA, who is a international disaster relief company. They support countries and people all over the world in disaster relief and war-torn countries. And I wanted to bring her on today because it's a very special perspective to talk about the dominoes that are occurring across the world in areas that you're not hearing about anymore. You know, coronavirus has completely taken over the news. So we're talking a lot about what's going on locally and hyper-locally, but we lose a lot of sight of what might be going on in other areas. And that will at some point make its way back to us. So today I'd like to bring on my very good friend, Kerri Murray, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on and how we should be watching it, be aware of it. Kerri, it is so good to see you. It's been months.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you, albeit virtually.
I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to introduce. This is my friend Steve and co-host Stephen Matley. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Brian.
So, Kerri, can you? I mean, we've talked a little bit, but we are not hearing much of anything anymore about international anything really, except for what has to do with coronavirus. So, can you, 10,000-foot view, just kind of give us an idea of how this has expanded and change a lot of the areas that you guys are working in?
Yeah, sure. So for folks that don't know, ShelterBox is an international disaster relief organization. And we really go in on the worst day ever to communities that have been devastated by natural disaster or conflict situation. So everything from earthquakes, cyclones, floods, volcanoes, to civil war. So places like Syria that have been nearly a decade of families that have been displaced. So, you know, right now, I always say if it bleeds, it leads, and it's on the worst day ever when people are really tuning in and learning about all these disasters facing our world. And the major disaster that's facing the entire world right now is the COVID-19 pandemic. It's affected everyone. And the interesting thing is that there are disasters happening all the time. And for a relief organization like ShelterBox, we are still responding. You may not have heard about it, but huge Category 5 cyclone devastated Vanuatu very recently, and you have tens of thousands of people who've been displaced. So what you can imagine with COVID is that it's a disaster on top of a disaster that's already displaced, that's been catastrophic to a community. So it's a huge, huge challenge. One, for an organization like ours, huge challenge, just logistics and supply chain issues with so many countries closing land and sea borders right now. So for what we do, we really focus on the most vulnerable people on our planet. We're super concerned right now about COVID really hitting and getting into particularly refugee camps. So when you look at places like Syria, you look across the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, some of the poorest and most vulnerable countries on the planet right now that now have COVID in the country. So if this virus gets into a refugee camp, this will be absolutely catastrophic. We're talking about countries that already politically, economically are already so fragile, and healthcare systems that in some places are really non-existent. And so we are really working to scale up our efforts to, we keep hearing social distance. I think all of us right now could really appreciate the importance of home and to our health and to our well-being and our safety. what we at ShelterBox do is we bring in emergency shelter and basic supplies to a community that's been devastated. And that shelter is typically, as you know, Brian, in the form of relief tents. So individual family relief tents. Critically important right now as we try in overcrowded areas, densely populated makeshift settlements or collective centers where refugees are. Really important that we can help people self-isolate, social distance in light of COVID.
Mm-hmm. So with regards to, I mean, we talk about dominoes a lot, like this COVID virus, everybody thinks it's going to be the thing. And truthfully, we don't know, but it is attacking other things. It's attacking food supply. You mentioned your guys' supplies are limited because suddenly that whole chain has been disrupted. Talk, if you can, a little bit about how all of that, even though we're not talking about it, we don't know about it because, as you mentioned, I had no idea about that catastrophic storm or the cyclone. I didn't know. How will that work its way back to the lives everyone's protecting here?
Yeah, so what's interesting about the cyclone, Category 5 cyclone, Cyclone Harold in Vanuatu is Vanuatu doesn't have any COVID cases. They don't want to have any COVID cases. They've closed their land and sea borders, and yet they have islands that have been 90% destroyed by the cyclone. So as a humanitarian aid organization that brings in shelter, and you've got all these homeless families, we need to reach these families. So they are not allowing any foreign nationals to come into the country. Very difficult. There aren't commercial flights going in. So this is going to require special airlift of supplies. And then we have local partners within Vanuatu that will actually take the supplies. We're going to do remote trainings. So just like everybody else has been doing, we're going to train people on how to use the aid remotely. And our partners will then distribute the aid and go island to island to make sure that families have this emergency shelter and humanitarian aid. So it's really interesting because our model typically is boots on the ground, getting directly to the end user. And even for us, it's very challenging right now. So, other places that we're seeing, like you look at a place like Syria, half the pre-war population's been displaced. In the past 4 months, you have a massive displacement of people, 1 million people just since December. So we're really concerned about reaching those people as well. And for us, it's also adapting. We have distribution partners that we're working with that are in Syria that are taking our aid to folks to make sure that we can help mitigate the spread and slow the spread of the virus. Shelter is one of the most important things, in addition to obviously healthcare and personal protection gear and devices. Shelter is critically important for people to isolate and social distance. So we're really very concerned about COVID, obviously across the United States, but some of these really vulnerable countries are slower to start, but they're now getting COVID into the countries, which this could last for years in some of these places. And all the development efforts that we've made and all the improvements over the past several years, you could see a significant decline because of this in some of these areas. And, we know how bad it's hitting economically in our country. Imagine some of these countries that, obviously already don't have a safety net.
Kerri, I got a question on that economic issue. Right now, the unemployment rate, of course, has jumped to over 20%. That one of the first things people cut out is donations to organizations like yours. How is that affecting you?
It affected us immediately. And so we're privately funded right now. We mostly get the funding for our global charitable work from individuals. We get it from foundations, some corporate donations. So Rotary for us is really important, but particularly the individual charitable revenue line is really already significantly been impacted. And we're seeing people really tightening it up because, they're uncertain about what's going to happen with COVID, their jobs. So we've definitely seen it impact our donation line. And the one thing that we haven't seen as much is the foundation line. So luckily, I think fortunately, we have received some donations from foundations that is enabling us to continue to adapt the aid. So right now, in addition to, and I think you guys have seen the green box that we bring, this is a small version, we have the big one that has the tent. We have cooking equipment, lights, water purification. We're adapting and adding things like soap, and we're adapting and adding things like hand washing basins, information on hygiene. on how to limit the spread. All of that makes our work cost a lot more. And so we're really out there trying to talk about the huge vulnerabilities of this virus and what we need to do to mitigate the spread of it in some of the most vulnerable places on the planet. And unfortunately, you know, for all charitable organizations, it's going to be a hustle and it's going to be a really tough year for us. So yeah, it's tough.
Well, you know, actually, so this is something interesting. And every morning I do a briefing with my team, and at 9 a.m. we do a call and I kind of explain what's going on in the news, because it's very, as you say, bleed leads, it's very one-dimensional information, but they're not looking at the exponential issue of what's going on beyond that. So for instance, the food supply chain has been disrupted, and a lot of farmers, 70% of their customer base here are restaurants. Well, restaurants are closed and no one's going. So they're dumping food, like literally just discarding it. And they're not going to keep it. So this problem with that is, if I'm a farmer and I just dumped last month's crop, I'm not going to go and try and make another month of that just to dump it again. I'm going to make less of it, because why would I want to keep throwing it away? Or at least that's the way I would think about it. But what's interesting about that is we have so much food and people are fine living at home right now. Everyone is, for the most part, surviving in the US. I mean, they're just doing less, but they are living. And the reality is we're never really taught to hedge for the uncertain event that may happen here. You know, we're very lucky and fortunate in that place. And as a result, we have so much excess that we don't use. We just toss it and everybody keeps on living. And this is kind of what brought Kerri and I together originally, is that, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, you know, being in real estate for 20 years, there was something that needed to change for me. And so we developed a philanthropy program built into the business so that we were creating something as we went. And that is, so every time we sell a home, we donate one through Kerri's organization. That's how we got so close. But the point is that if we remodeled some of how this next step goes around things like that, then we don't have to worry about those people over there and make such reactive decisions to help them. We can be doing it as we go and make it just a part of the function, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And, you know, what you reminded me of something a phrase I've been hearing about, especially with COVID. Someone said, you know, people think we're all in the same boat around the world and with this virus, and we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm. Everyone's boat is very different, right? Based on the situation where you're living. And, you know, are you home with your kids and you're working full time and you have to school them? Are you a nurse or a doctor and you're spending most of your time in a healthcare center? Are you a refugee in a camp just struggling to survive every day and, you know, get a roof over your head for your kids with no income, no medical care? And so the situations that we are all in could be very, very different with this virus. Albeit it's affected us all, but it's affected us all a bit differently, right?
Absolutely. So I guess the next question I have or the next part of this conversation is, where is this all leading? You know, because we were in this for a while. The idea that it's going to be over relatively quickly it's probably tough to swallow that. It's going to probably take us some time to get out of this. Everyone's in the US, or let's say countries that have means, are going to want to get back to the life they had, and that life doesn't really exist. So we're all going to try and get back to some semblance of that. But where does it go for people that you're helping? How do people here need to adjust their behavior and thinking to understand that these part of the world, it does come home? Because it does, and people don't realize it's in the form of taxes, relief aid. I mean, there's so much money we spend in taxes that goes towards these things, along with, you know, military. Like, what do you think about after this?
Well, I think right now for the humanitarian organizations that are leaning in to, especially the global ones helping the rest of the world, we have to do every single thing that we can to mitigate the spread of this virus, because it will be absolutely catastrophic and it will destroy communities. Countries that, you know, we hear about that have 1 or 2 ventilators per country, places like Zambia. So that we have to do everything we can to really help people isolate, social distance, maintain good hygiene, limit the spread of this infection in very vulnerable places. Because like I mentioned, this could overturn all of the improvements we've made on the development side by decades. So we have to do everything we can to stay on the forefront of it. And that's why when this happened, we knew, as difficult as it would be for our organization to continue to respond, we have an obligation to do that and a responsibility. And so even though financially it's really hitting us hard, we've only scaled and we're only growing to serve, because it will have long-term effects on the entire.
Yeah. And as we're talking about this, the reopening the countries is kind of a hot button right now. A lot of people want to get things going again. And I guess part of what you said, I want to just tie in real quick. What if people do not take this as seriously as, let's say, the level of uncertainty we currently have surrounding, because we don't really have a lot. If they don't take it at least that serious, what are the economic implications you see on an international level and a local level? Because you touch a lot of that. What do you see happening if we don't simply take the time to pay attention to it?
Yeah, that's a really, really difficult question, right? Because, I think right now I'm really relying on and looking to science to give us our best information on how to the spread of this infection. There's no question, at least where we live here in California, that Californians have done an amazing job at social distancing, self-isolating, and mitigating the spread of this infection. We're really watching the rest of the world and learning, looking at places like Sweden, where they're hoping for herd immunity and opening things back up, and other states in our country that are some slowly, some more quickly opening things up. So, Brian, I don't think we really know yet. I think every day is a new norming, and we're learning every single day about this virus. But I feel really privileged to live in a place where we took it really seriously, and I think we probably prevented thousands of cases and certainly lots of deaths as a result of the steps that our state took. So, but it's a tough question to answer.
Sure.
So here's my question on this. We have a lot of news starting back in January, and it was in China and then Italy and Korea, Thailand, into the United States, and all Hong Kong, all the developed areas. I've not heard a single word on COVID in Latin America, most of Africa, the undeveloped areas of Asia. Why is that? Obviously, we know it's going to affect every human being on the planet. And most of those human beings do not live in those developed countries. So why the silence where I've heard nothing? As far as I know, there's 0 cases in Latin America or in most of Africa by the news. And I know that's not true.
No, it isn't. It isn't. Some places have been slower. We've been in front of it. So I would call us like first, or maybe third, right? So, but there are other places that are just further behind, like Africa. But now it's really catching up, and they're not doing the same level of testing, nor are they doing the same level of reporting. So I think it's like this wave that's been coming in, and it could be a tsunami, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, also places like Syria. But it's interesting though, because it did make quite a bit of news, not maybe the front page headlines, but places like Ecuador, places like Guayaquil, it's just been so sad because they had a massive problem. They were definitely underreporting the number of cases and certainly deaths. And there were cases and lots of news stories about bodies literally piling up on the sidewalks and people having to put their families in cardboard boxes. And on the sides of the streets, people were selling just containers to put bodies in, and they were piling up, and some people were abandoning those because they didn't have the money to deal with burying. And we even heard that in our own country, which is sad. But
see, I never actually heard that. All I keep hearing is about another handful of people in New York City or someplace like that, or another handful of people in Europe. And I think why is the news so focused on smaller numbers in developed countries when all this mass destruction may be going on in other places? Is it because those countries aren't high viewership, or is it because they feel like the viewers that are watching don't really care about those countries?
Yeah, I've just seen a real tendency here in the U.S. for people to kind of bunker down and be focused on their local town, their local county, their local state. It obviously the mitigation of the spread of this has really varied, but in timing, state by state by state. So I've just seen people really hunkering down. And even with charitable giving, I've seen people really just keeping it truly local during this time, maybe their local food bank, right? And so it's just, I think it's a natural reaction that you see in the press, especially this is a disaster, right? This pandemic that's affecting all of us. And I don't think we've ever seen that in our history before, something that is affecting every single person on the planet.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads into something I really want to ask you about, because obviously I'm a fan of everything. Clearly, we've been working together for 4 or 5 years now, but we needed them to have a more global consciousness of what's going on. We'd like them to get back involved. I mean, I personally would. I can't speak for everybody, but what kind of stuff at minimum would be something that would help? So like, for instance, I believe in the hierarchy of needs, right? Water, food, shelter, but only one of those gives people security and lets them at least rest themselves to do the next day, at least in my mind. So at what limit could people at least get barely involved in to keep the ship afloat, as they are doing in all areas of their life, that would benefit organizations like yours?
Yeah, so for us, obviously, one of the priorities right now is shelter, right? So there's a variety of different shelters that we can bring in, but helping as many people as we can into individual shelter where they can social distance and self-isolate. The other things right now are things like soap and hygiene items, helping us be able to buy and procure and distribute those around the world. The other basic things that we do, low cost items, but really important, things like stainless steel cook sets. I can't tell you how important these are to families when we provide basic cooking equipment to families who've lost everything and who are displaced. You can boil water, you can make a hot meal, you can have the conditions to stay healthy. Our sleeping mats, blankets, water purification to limit vector-borne illness. So all of these things are essential for life. And you could lean in with organization at so many different levels, whether it's $10, $20, $50 for the cook sets, to a full tent or a shelter kit to help a family who literally has lost everything to be able to have a place to call home for their families, especially during this time. Our work has never been more important at ShelterBox than it is right now. So there are so many ways to lean in. And for people who want to procure a whole box, you can do that. But for people who say, you know what, I want to give some soap and a hand washing station and support that effort, all of that's available on the ShelterBoxUSA.org website under the gift catalog.
Very good. I want to give Steve to ask any additional questions he might have, or Kerri, any final thoughts you would have as we wrap up our video. But what I want to emphasize is that this is actually a global epidemic, which is why no one is talking about anything other than this. So it's all affected all over. Obviously, there's different areas that have different needs, but being involved with your organizations locally and abroad is the only way we can surely assure ourselves that we cleaned up the whole mess, because that stuff could get right back to us anyway. Steve, is there any final interests and thoughts and questions you might have?
Well, two things. One, I'm curious if you've changed the content of your box to include things like face masks and gloves and those type of things, because you're going into these countries where we're trying to get people to maybe shelter in place and you're providing those shelters for them. That's one question. The second thing is, I'm assuming that just because COVID is running through the planet, that the tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes didn't stop, and other diseases, starvation around the world hasn't stopped, which is what you're usually addressing. So how are you balancing all that out in the midst of all this?
So thanks for Steve. Those are great questions. The first one around PPE. So our main goal when we work across the world is do no harm right now. And so we've had to adapt not just the aid package, but how we distribute and deliver the aid. So typically we'll do distribution days. We could see 2,000 families in a day. We're limiting those to maybe a couple dozen up to 50 families a day. We're maintaining social distance during the distribution, as well as using PPE. So it's masks, it's gloves, it's sanitizers. The typical tools that we give out to train people on how to construct the shelters, use the aid. Instead of giving individual information sheets, we're doing banners, we're doing virtual-based training as well. We're doing different types of post-deployment monitoring and evaluation via phone versus in person. So we've really had to adapt how we deliver humanitarian aid. And just because COVID has happened doesn't mean we're not having hurricanes and the cyclones, and we're still responding to those, albeit it's a lot more difficult and complex and challenging, but we're finding ways to adapt and reach these families. And never has it been more important for us to do this type of work. So we're doing it. So I think, the PPE and all that piece is super, super important. Difficult to procure, as you know, but we're finding ways to get it done.
Cool. Kerri, before we get everything wrapped up, I do want to say that we will have the basic information of ShelterBox in the video and the stuff we put out. Should anybody want to research, look up, and donate if they find they're so inclined. But Kerri, is there anything else you'd like to add for everybody to know just before we go?
Yes. So for people who don't know, what you've done, Brian, is something so innovative, and it's really, I think, transforming the industry. And I just think it's super exciting to look at the program that you've created. And as you know, you called me up years ago and you started talking to me about wanting, every time that you sold a house, you had to find a way to give a house to a family who'd lost everything. And you wanted to build a model of philanthropy into your real estate practice. And I was like, wow, no one's ever asked me that before. The past few years has really transformed lives. And it's made a huge impact on our world. And that you're proactively building this in everything that you do. I mean, I just think it's already spreading. So not only are you doing it, Brian, but we're getting requests for your program, which is Sell a House, Give a Home, and from all over the world. And so I think what you've done is incredible, and you've spread something that is very powerful and very meaningful, and it is having a huge impact on families' lives across the world. So we're so grateful of the partnership.
I thank you for that. And I fully believe in everything you guys do. I want this world to be changed through everything that I do as well. I know Steve feels similar in the work that he does too. That's why we created the show, so people get better information, better education than just what's out there on Instagram. So thank you for that, as always. We just love you. So Steve, anything you want to add?
No, I just want to say thank you, Kerri, for the work you're doing out there, and for working in the areas that we are not hearing about. You know, I'd say the news media seems focused on what we want to hear locally and nationally, and really ignoring a lot of the world. So I'm glad there are people out there that are watching those parts of the world and taking care of those people, so they're not getting lost in the shuffle and not being ignored. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, and thank you again for. Go ahead, Kerri. Yeah, please.
Just a final note. I think one of the things I've observed working in disaster relief is that in the worst of times, you really see the best of humanity. And I think you're seeing that around the world right now, whether it's people volunteering and helping at the local food banks, whether it's people making masks, whether it's people leaning in and helping the work of ShelterBox. There's so many ways that even though you're remote, even though you're homebound, you can make an impact and you can make a difference. And so I've been seeing that in a way that is so refreshing, and even in the most difficult of times, it's a really inspiring thing to see.
Wonderful. And as we sign off here, I want to thank again Stephen Matley and Kerri Murray, who's the president of ShelterBox USA, a disaster relief company who is helping around the world with coronavirus, whether you know it or not. And if you'd like to find out more information, please find it inside the links of our video. And we will see you next time here on Real Men of Real Estate. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.